With this lecture, we'll start a series of classes focusing on religion. This lecture will focus on religion in the broader sense. The next lecture will look at more specific forms of religious practice. Religion is really interesting because it ties together almost all other aspects of culture into one more or less coherent worldview, which justifies and rationalizes everything else about a culture. Religion is basic to the ways that most societies view the world they live in, their emic perspective. It informs the world and gives it a comprehensible structure that it otherwise wouldn't have. So by understanding a culture's religion, we can learn a lot about the culture itself, as well as the people who live in that culture. Defining religion is notoriously difficult. I think it can probably be considered the most difficult concept in anthropology, and many different scholars have taken a crack at it. The definition offered by your textbook was offered by the anthropologist Anthony F.C. Wallace, and states that religion consists of belief and ritual concerned with supernatural beings, powers, and forces. Perhaps more generally, we might say that religion is a belief system that relates humans to supernatural powers or entities. That is, religion tells us natural humans how to interact with the supernatural parts of the universe. Even those beliefs that aren't directly tied to interaction and behavior are important for structuring and guiding our relationships with the supernatural. Both of those definitions include two important words: belief, which obviously has to be there in any definition of religion, and supernatural. That word presents almost as many difficulties as religion itself. Kotak glosses supernatural as a non-material realm beyond, but believed to impinge on, the observable world. He says it cannot be verified or falsified, but that's an ethnocentric point of view, because in many religious traditions, the supernatural is considered eminently verifiable. Furthermore, many cultures make no conscious distinction between natural and supernatural. Everything that exists is part of nature to them, including magic and deities. Other cultures draw the dividing lines between nature and supernature differently from us. To some Native American tribes, it's perfectly natural to hear an owl speaking in an intelligent, if not necessarily understandable, language. A more culturally relative definition might be that the supernatural consists of those powers or entities that have abilities beyond human capabilities, or are not subject to the same sorts of physical laws as humans. That is, while the word is supernatural, I think what we're really referring to is superhuman, or perhaps extra-human. So religion, by this definition, boils down to more social relationships. The sorts of social relationships that we spent the course talking about so far are those that relate humans to other humans. Religion is a social system that relates humans to everything else. Other scholars have approached religion not from the nature-supernature perspective, but from the ordinary-extraordinary perspective. In the thinking of Emil Durkheim, one of the founders of anthropology in the 19th century, religion was found in the sacred, aspects of experience separated from everyday experience. Everything not sacred was profane. A better English translation of the French word might be mundane. In this way, Durkheim defined religious experience as basically unusual and extraordinary. Durkheim thought this extraordinary experience functioned to create what Victor Turner later called Communitas, an intense feeling of community and belonging. In this way, by changing the everyday, mundane experiences of life into the extraordinary experiences of the sacred, Durkheim believed religion would create society. This explanation of religion developed out of Durkheim's armchair study of Australian Aborigines totemism. Durkheim himself never conducted fieldwork like many 19th century scholars. Totemism, according to Durkheim, was the original unelaborated form of human religion, from which all later forms of religion developed. A totem is an animal, plant, or other natural object which, in Durkheim's interpretation, stands as a symbol for the community. Members of the religious community claim descent from or identity with the totem, so that while worshiping it, they are in fact worshiping themselves. So, for example, Australian Aborigines of the Kangaroo clan gathered together to worship the kangaroo, whom they see as their ancestor. But since they are, in a certain sense, kangaroos themselves, they're actually worshiping one another. And by showing publicly their devotion to the larger group, they strengthen their social bonds with one another. The only evidence that Durkheim had to support his claim that totemism was the original form of religion was his 19th century unilinear evolutionism perspective. Australian Aborigines were some of the simplest societies known to Western scholars at the time, and Durkheim simply assumed that their religious practices were older and more basic than anything else. Thus, his explanation of the origin of religion is no longer considered a valid theory, but it does highlight an important point. Religion is often a communal, social experience. Another early attempt to understand the origin of religion was made by E.B. Tylor, also in the late 19th century. Tylor attributed the rise of religion to humans' need to understand and interpret dreams. During dreams, he said, people experienced events that never occurred, and they met people who were either dead or very far away. How could those experiences have happened when they were so clearly impossible? This led people to speculate that there must be some portion of the person separable from his physical body, which separated from the body during sleep and which remained alive after the body had died. That, of course, is the soul. Having given people spirits, someone then speculated that animals too might have separable souls and then inanimate objects as well. This system of religion is called animism, the attribution of intelligent souls to people, animals, and inanimate objects. Tylor also believed in unilinear evolutionism, and he saw all human societies as progressing steadily through a series of religious forms, from animism to polytheism, where several spirits were given special precedence, to monotheism, where only a single spirit was considered supreme, and ultimately to an atheistic science, which he said would disprove the existence of spirits altogether. Tylor's explanation of the origin of religion can be ruled out for the same reasons that Durkheim's can. All such theories fail because they try to find a single universal explanation for all religions throughout the world. The implicit assumption is that religion was only invented once in human history and only for a single reason. Much more likely is that religious beliefs arose independently among human ancestors throughout the world for a variety of reasons and for multiple reasons in each culture. Today, most theorists have largely given up the search for the origins of religion. Even if they did come up with the way that religion had first developed, they'd have no way to prove it. And besides, most think that there is no one origin of religion. Instead, anthropologists today are more interested in studying how religion operates in culture and what roles it plays in how we live our lives. That is, anthropologists are not so interested in the origins of religion as they are the functions of religion. Of course, both Durkheim's and Tylor's theories about the origins of religion are basically functional. Durkheim believed the function of religion was to strengthen social solidarity and generate communitas, and Tylor believed it functioned cognitively to explain dreams and help answer questions. Bronislaw Malinowski, one of the most influential anthropologists of the 20th century, approached religion in conjunction with a closely intertwined set of beliefs, namely magic. Magic consists of practices that are intended to accomplish particular, specific aims through supernatural means. Malinowski saw religion as a particularly well-developed, somewhat less practical form of magic, and he felt that magic functioned primarily as a way of alleviating fear and anxiety. Based on his observations in the Trobriander Islands, Malinowski realized that many societies had faith in their technology and their lifestyles, but there nevertheless remained a great deal of uncertainty and risk. Even with the best skills and newest, strongest boats, Trobriand islanders still risked drowning every time they went fishing. Malinowski believed that religion evolved as a way of overcoming those uncertainties. Performing this ritual would prevent the boat from sinking. Carrying that amulet would ensure a safe return. Religion thus becomes a sort of self-delusion, a state of denial that gives people enough false confidence to continue living. It provides a sense of control where none actually exists. Malinowski's theory about the function of magic, and by extension religion, is one that has been well supported by ethnographic data, but it doesn't seem to explain all forms of religious behavior. As with the question of origins, a better strategy is to avoid trying to find one all-embracing function of all religious beliefs, and instead look at functions of particular religious practices and beliefs. Religious beliefs, of course, can function to give meaning to experience and to structure our understanding of the world around us, but in a much broader sense than Tylor's fairly narrow ideas about dreams. Religion often fulfills this cognitive or explanatory function by providing a cosmology, a system for describing and understanding the universe, its parts, and how they interact with one another. Science can also provide a cosmology for society, of course, but in many cultures the most widespread cosmology originates from religion. By explaining to believers how the universe is put together and how it works, religion can provide a framework through which they work out their own decisions and behaviors. But religion is more than just beliefs, it's also actions. If religion is defined as the rules of social interaction with the supernatural, then those interactions are essential to understanding religion. Rituals are stereotyped, repeated behaviors that follow a prescribed order of events. To that definition, I would add that rituals are performed before an audience, even if that audience consists only of supernatural beings, and they are intended to accomplish some specific goal. Not all rituals are religious in nature. Consider the presidential inauguration ceremony, but many of them are. Each religious tradition has its own unique rituals, but many share very broad patterns of ritual. In most religions, for example, people can simply converse with their deities, which is called prayer. Sacrifices, or offerings, are gifts given to the deities, either to convince them to act on the worshipper's behalf, or to create an obligation whereby they must act. Think about the principles of reciprocity we discussed several weeks ago. Sacrifice can be seen as an economic exchange between the worshipper and the deity. Many rituals involve trance. Trances are scientifically verifiable altered states of consciousness, periods of time when the function of the trancer's brain shifts in very basic ways, changing his or her experience of the world around them. Trances can be created by drumming, dancing, meditation, the taking of drugs, or any of a variety of other means. As interpreted by the worshippers themselves, during the trance one of two things happens. In one scenario, worshippers believe that the individual's body is inhabited by the deity, either removing or displacing or deactivating the individual's own soul. Other worshippers can then interact with the deity. These are called possession trances. In the other kind of trance, the individual's spirit separates from its body and travels to meet the deity somewhere else. In this case, the trancing individual acts as an emissary on the behalf of the other worshippers. These are called soul flight trances, because the trancing individual often experiences a sensation of flying. Divination is a kind of ritual where the supernatural is allowed to make decisions for the people or to reveal information to them. Casting stones, tarot cards, palm reading, and tea leaves are all forms of divination. In a broader sense, rituals have been sorted into the categories of rites of passage and rites of intensification. A rite of passage is a ritual whose acknowledged purpose is to formally move a person from one phase of life to another. Less formally, rites of passage are initiation ceremonies. Because a person's transition from one life phase to another, say from childhood to adulthood or from unmarried person to spouse, because that change of life phase changes a person's social identity, it necessitates a change in relationships between the person and other members of the community. You interact with an adult differently than you interact with a child. So when a child becomes an adult, you have to change your relationship. Likewise, that person's relationships with the supernatural also change. Rites of passage are the community's formal public recognition of those changes, and they occur in every culture. What's more interesting, however, is that they all follow roughly the same pattern, regardless of the cultural tradition. All rites of passage have a tripartite structure of separation, liminality, and incorporation. In the separation phase, a person is divided from his or her previous social identity. For example, in the traditional European wedding ceremony, one of the most important rites of passage, the bride begins by walking down the aisle with her father, who then gives her away. She is thus separated from her identity as a daughter, a relationship that largely defined her relationships previously. In the liminality phase, the subject is, in the words of Victor Turner, betwixt and between. Having been separated from his or her previous identity, the person exists outside of society, with no identity, and is often no longer subject to the normal rules of behavior. The textbook has an excellent discussion of liminality on pages 247 and 248. Liminality ends with an initiation, where a new social identity is conferred on the subject. In the wedding ceremony example, this comes when the pastor declares the groom and bride man and wife. In the incorporation phase, the subject is reintegrated into the community in his or her new social identity and begins forming new relationships. Following the wedding comes a wedding reception attended by the entire group, where people greet the bride for the first time as Mrs. So-and-so. Thereafter, the woman's social identity will be greatly defined by her status as a wife, rather than her status as a daughter, which is still present but now is much less important. Rites of passage may be individual, as in a baby's christening ceremony. They may involve small groups, like a wedding, or they may be collective, as in a high school graduation ceremony. Rites of intensification, however, involve the whole community. A rite of intensification is one that creates communitas and strengthens social solidarity by involving everyone in a single communal goal. This can often involve a form of liminality, where normal rules of behavior are loosened or inverted. Carnival or Mardi Gras are rites of intensification among Catholic communities, where normal rules of propriety are loosened prior to the advent of Lent. At any other time of year, the behaviors typical of a New Orleans Mardi Gras will get you thrown in jail. But after the celebration, the community can pull together and endure the Lenten season of deprivation. These are manifest, or consciously acknowledged functions of religion and ritual. Religion also fulfills latent or hidden functions. It may describe behaviors that bring the society into balance with its ecological setting, such as the Hindu prohibition on eating beef. Cattle are more valuable to Hindus as beasts of burden and sources of dairy than they are as sources of meat, which can be obtained from less valuable or wild animals. Prohibitions on gluttony and wastefulness in Christianity might also be another example of a latent ecological function. Religion also serves as a means of social control, methods that keep people's behaviors in acceptable ranges so that society isn't disrupted. This is essentially the same idea as social regulation introduced in the politics lecture. By describing these proper sorts of behaviors that a person should undertake in order to please the deities, Religions control behaviors and punish bad behavior. Some anthropologists have seen this kind of social maintenance as the primary function of religion, and some have seen it as an insidious and dangerous tool of oppression. Karl Marx, for example, was one of the first social scientists to think about religion from this perspective, and he famously called religion the opiate of the masses, implying that it was a tool to keep the oppressed working classes asleep and blissfully unaware of how they were being taken advantage of. Most scholars would not go that far, but it is widely accepted that religion fulfills a social control function. In our next lecture, we'll continue our discussion of religion by shifting from a broad study of religion in general to looking at how particular religious traditions have enacted these ideas.